and welcome back to Art and Code, Homemade. My name is Golan Levin. I'm professor of electronic art at Carnegie Mellon University and director of the Frank-Ratchye STUDIO for Creative Inquiry. And this is the third and final day of Art and Code Homemade 2021. The Art and Code Festival Series is concerned with democratizing the cultural and creative potentials of emerging technologies. We have a Discord server to support community conversations, by the way, if you're watching this, and if you're interested in participating in those chats, we ask you to please register at artandcode.com, which is our festival website. And you can specifically go to artandcode.com/homemade/register to receive the link for the Discord chats. It's a pandemic, it's winter, we're quarantined in our rooms, and the world is in turmoil. How can we stay vitally creative and connected at this moment? We present Art and Code Homemade, a free online festival featuring inspirational talks by creators we admire who work with digital tools and crafty approaches to make things that preserve the magic of something homemade. Art and Code Homemade has been made possible by an award from the Media Arts Program of the National Endowment for the Arts, by the Sylvia and David Steiner Speaker Series at Carnegie Mellon University, and by support from generous donations to the Directors Fund at the Frank-Ratchye STUDIO for Creative Inquiry. This morning, it's my terrific pleasure to introduce Cyril Diagne. He's a Paris-based interaction designer and creative coder, specialized in the application of machine learning and computer vision to human-computer interaction. He's a co-creator of ClipDrop, an augmented reality app for cutting and pasting between physical and digital worlds. Cyril Diagne.
Thank you, Goran. A few words about myself. I've always been a bad student. This is my final grade at the French baccalaureate. I had 3 out of 20, which is really bad. I know that folks in the US use a different notation system, A, B, C, D, F. So to sort of give a common ground, if we apply this ratio to a keyboard, this is the keys that you're left with. So I've always been a bad student. This was sort of really my own native language, the French test. I got 3 out of 20. I felt like, okay, normally the path is you're a good kid, you have good grades, and you have a good job. I failed at the first 2. There was no way I would get a good job. So I was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna be an artist because I guess that's the only thing that's left. So I did that. I learned how to code and became an artist at the art collective Lab 212 in France, which was a phenomenal experience. We got to create interactive installations that we exhibited around the world. This is my very first project in the collective called POP, for People on Pop, in 2009, with young school students from the Meknes School in Morocco. And we created this installation that lets you take a pose from a choreographer, take a picture when you reach that pose, and add it to a collective video dance. And just with the theme homemade, this shows how we recorded the choreography. Because I was so broke, I had a blue roll of screen, but the shop didn't have blue, they only had green, and I literally only had the money to buy 1 roll. So I had the brilliant idea, it's no problem, I'll just put both together and I'll key both colors. Of course, if you've done video keying, you know how stupid an idea that was, and you can imagine the pain I had to key that video. But you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter so much. It was painful, but it worked, and it was enough to get started. And for about 7 years, I just did that, really, hacking around at home. Here you can see my former home. For the quick anecdote, because rent in Paris is so expensive, I didn't have space for a lab, so I had to get rid of my couch. So I didn't have a living room, I only had a lab instead of the living room. But it was just so fun. Every day, just going on about whatever felt interesting at the time, not worrying if it fit any boxes, if it was going to be able, if I would be able to exhibit this, to show it even, didn't really matter. It was just about hacking all day long and exchange ideas with the friends of the collective and see if what we could be done with it. And strangely and ironically, just by doing that eventually led me to an academic job, because the ECAL, the University of Design in Lausanne, Switzerland, offered me the role of a professor and to lead the Bachelor of Media and Interaction Design, which felt absolutely crazy because, as I mentioned, I've always been a bad student, but they said, actually, this kind of practice is what we do in the Bachelor. So I was a bit skeptical at the beginning, but then I realized that it's true. It's really the way that the Bachelor is sort of structured and the way that students go about creating and understanding and yes, creating knowledge on the field of media and interaction design, which is extremely hands-on, really, yes, hands-on, a practical approach to interaction design. So I had 3 wonderful years there. This is one project that I really like, which we exhibited at the Milan Design Fair, which is When Objects Dream. So here the students turned objects of everyday life and try to explore what could be their inner life and how we could get a peek on that inner life. But then, so it was wonderful, and it reconciliated me with academia, but I fell in love. I fell in love, both literally and figuratively. Literally because I got married that year, and my wife were doing long distance. She was in Paris, and we thought it'd be nice to live together. So I moved back to France, to Paris, and figuratively because, okay, I felt that was an ambitious connection to make. I realize now. I fell in love with AI. I fell in love with AI. I think that was in 2014. I saw the Inception paper, and really the same way that I felt when I saw code and I felt how it was going to change the world and completely change my life, I felt the same thing with AI. I felt that same spark again, that this is going to be incredibly incredibly important. And so I was lucky. Oh yes, this shows an example from a beautiful paper from Sean Carter and Michael Nielsen that sort of goes through how AI can help create more natural interaction with content and with data. So this really shows strikingly how user interfaces are going to be transformed by this technology. And yes, I was lucky to enter a very long residency of 6 years at the Google Arts and Culture Lab, which I just stopped in December. And I was able to focus entirely on that. So that was really, really, really nice. And of course, some crazy unexpected things happened. For instance, showing my hacky open frameworks visualization of artworks to Steven Spielberg and James Cameron at TED. It was a bit random, but it happened. So that was really, yes, really an unexpected journey through the corporate world of big FANG companies. I was able, at the Google Arts and Culture Lab, as I mentioned, I was able to really apply machine learning to interaction design. This is a project called Portrait Matcher, which is very similar to Sharing Faces from Kyle MacDonald, but here applied to artworks. And it was fun, it was nice, but it felt a little bit gimmicky, a little bit, the connection with the artworks was a bit shallow. And I've wanted to see if there was a way to create a deeper connection with artworks and using the face. And so that was in 2015. The FaceNet paper was out, but there was no public implementation of it. But being at Google, I was able to use their internal implementation because it's Googlers who made this paper. And so it was crazy. I was able to just put the artworks, all the artworks of Google Arts and Culture through the model, get the embeddings, and then do nearest neighbor search, sorry, from any image. And it was mind-blowing. The results we were getting was, I was absolutely shocked by some of the connections that it would make, and not just on portraits, but on any image that would only person that would appear on an artwork. So that was pretty insane. And I realized that as I was showing, people were sending me their pictures, and they would ask me to send them their match. the more I would send back, the more would come. And at the time, I had to do them one by one manually on a notebook, on a Jupyter notebook. And it became quite obvious that people were creating a super strong connection with whatever match they were getting. And it was quite amazing that this project actually became public and became a feature within the Google Arts and Culture app, which became viral and pushed the app as #1 on all the stores. It was pretty insane. Now, I think that was in 2018. And of course, there's been many developments, and it's still crazy to me today that despite all the crazy issues that were present in that app, in that feature, that it still managed to get sort of a positive narrative attached to it. Of course, thanks, in part, I would say, thanks to this proxy, it helped foster the conversation on all the issues that it had. And I wouldn't think that the same thing would happen again today, but I was lucky, I guess, sort of a lucky moment to have released that project. But anyway, I won't go too long on this. We did many experiments that are accessible on the experiments website. But then I started to feel a lack, something that was really missing, and that was increasingly painful, which was the agency, being able to choose and to bring a project to light. For instance, this is one example that I still to this day find absolutely delightful and I adore, which is a watch face that shows you dancers that match the position of the watch hands. And it was a bit strange that I felt no one really cared to make this app public. And yeah, it made me feel this lack of agency that you have in the corporate world, where of course there are gatekeepers. And it reminded me of all the issues I had at school with people that are not necessarily the people who the artwork is for, but still being the one to judge if they're going to get to see it at all. And I felt wrong. And so that coincided, this realization, with the lockdown. And it was an opportunity to force myself to create independent prototypes and research that would only fulfill my own interests. And so I set up this sort of structure where I would, in maximum 1 week, but as it turns out, most of the projects I showed were done over the weekend, but there would be this hard limit of 1 week in order to be able not to even think if what I'm doing makes any sense. But the goal is really the sprint. Someone who sprints doesn't stop in the middle to think if he's going fast or not. He just goes and look back after. This is why I don't like the idea of a 2-week sprint, which happens a lot in corporate, because I think it sort of fails the purpose to have this weekend break in the middle. So no, maximum 1 week. And the most important thing is no pause. You go as far as you can, you go to the end, and after you look back and you realize, oh, what have I done? This is stupid. I should absolutely not show that. Or the opposite, you are like, well, now that it's done, you know what? Anyway, let's just show it and maybe it will interest someone. And this exact process has changed my life, and maybe it can change yours too. So yes, the process was very simple and tuned toward AI plus interaction design. So you basically mix one model, plenty available on Paper with Code, GitHub, a data set. So again, you have visual data, you have Google dataset search, plenty of freely accessible data sets available, and an integration. So the integration, you come up with your own sort of experience and culture, and whether it's an app, a tool, a website, whatever, a physical object, an piece of electronics, whatever. But then these three sort of spark an experiment idea. Then you can process it and fine-tune a model using this unique mix, with this unique mix as intent. And then you can deploy the model and share a demo, and very importantly, share it. If you feel like there is no risk of causing harm with what you've done, at least this is what I was applying. If there is no risk to cause harm, then I shouldn't try to judge too hard. I should share it and let other people find maybe something that would resonate with them, including the code, because of many sort of the reason of why this research existed was thanks to open source. So it was absolutely critical to make all those prototypes open source. So this is one example called Instagram 3D Home Chrome extension that was done in a weekend, but just applying the 3D photography using context-aware layer depth impainting paper from CVPR 2020 to Instagram. So using this super hackish way where you don't need a GPU because it's using Colab, you can have a Chrome extension that turns all images on Instagram in 3D automatically. So I felt this was an interesting way to sort of revisit existing content. Here, the beautiful photos of Martin Parr. This was another example of a weekend experiment again. Face doodle using MediaPipe. So here, this ongoing obsession with the face and yes, and face and interacting with your face, but here being able to just doodle and draw simple shapes and colors on your face. This just shows a little bit of how it works. But again, just using open source technologies, one of the most beautiful things for me about open source is that you don't need permission. I think this is such a underestimated aspect of open source, which is that because there is no price, because there is no license, because there is no contact us button to get to the trial, you just get the code, you don't ask permission to anybody, you just get going. And I find that extremely powerful. And for the anecdote, it can have such unexpected ripple effect. I mean, I don't think Golan Levin knew that he was going to change my life, me, Cyril, in France, when he zipped a few C++ files and sent them over to Zach Lieberman. And yet, this is just the way this code goes when it's open source. This is another example, freestyle flip detection using TensorFlow.js, so running in the browser. Here, the idea was to do a sort of a juggling game where you could play with your phone without looking at your screen. So it was a bit short in a weekend. I didn't finish it, but I managed to do a sort of functioning prototype, sort of. But it was fun. And then there was this one, AR copy paste. Just so you know, but I'll let you see the video. But just so you know, for me, this was really one prototype like the other. I thought it was cool because otherwise I wouldn't have made it. But for me, it wasn't something particularly different from the other. It was just, yeah, another weekend, started on Friday at home using whatever equipment I had, and released the video on Sunday. So really homemade, extremely scrappy. The code is open source. You can see how badly coded it is, but it worked. And it resonated with the folks who got to see it online. This is a little bit how it works. So using SIFT, I won't go into too much technical detail, but using OpenCV, it's possible to know where the phone is pointing at, which location of the screen the phone is pointing at. And using, oops, I'll go on this. Using here, the prototype was using BassNet, a model from Huibin Qin and other researchers from the University of Alberta. It's possible to detect which pixel of an incoming image are part of the main subject and which ones are part of the background. Using a convolutional neural net, sort of a UNet, and combining the two, it's possible to create fairly easily this tool, this app that can copy anything around you and paste it directly in whatever tool you're using at whichever location you need it. So the cool thing is that it reduces, even in the best scenario, if you have AirDrop, so it means you have an iPhone, you have a Mac, you have everything set up. It requires 11 operations. With this, it requires 2 operations. And the crazy things again happened, which is that the world took notice, and even academia took notice, because I got my first paper on arXiv. Remember, I'm bad student, so it's a bit weird. And even invited to talk during the Black in AI workshop at NeurIPS, which is an extremely formal academic conference, the opposite of this one. And so it's really, yes, the world reacts in unexpected ways. And it's, you know, another anecdote for that is Lab 212. We only started exhibiting in France once we got international recognition. So, and we're like, guys, we've been there the whole time. What took you so long? But it's this thing that people will look somewhere else, maybe for external forms of validation, but it shows the benefits of not being in only one place. And yes, the world took notice. The prototype went kind of viral. It showed up in all the many blogs, and my neighbor came and was like, oh, guy, what's happening? I see your name on LinkedIn. I don't understand. It really blew out of proportions. And because the code was open source, people were able to tweak it and turn it into their own version. Here is one of my favorite examples: is someone making cocktails from the photos that they find online. So here, margaritas with what I guess is a margarita machine. I didn't know that existed, but apparently. So I found that super cool. And I would have definitely never had the idea to make that. That's another beauty of open source. Oops. Now with everything that gains public visibility, of course, you get the trolls come. And interestingly, with this project, the trolls were coming with the idea that it's fake, that it was a fake video done in 3D. And the crazy thing was, some arguments seem to really make sense. I mean, I'm like, no, objectively, if I had not filmed my prototype myself, and I just read this comment seeing that video, I could believe this. It's fairly elaborate. And so there was two things, two routes. Either I would fight online with every single one of them, and it would have led nowhere, or I could just make it public, an app that anyone can test and see that it actually works. And so thanks to the help of Jonathan Blanchet and Damien Henry, two friends, we turned it into a public app. So something that started extremely scrappy in a weekend hack, just because why not, pretty much, became an app that people were actually using in their workflows. And it's being used by hundreds of thousands of people, which is still crazy to me, because as I mentioned again, it didn't start with this sort of grand vision. It was a small, fun prototype amongst many. But and it keeps going on, because now we are a team of 6 people, because a product requires a company, and this company, because now we have so many aspects going on, we need help. So we are 6, and we've joined a startup accelerator called Y Combinator. So in pretty much all aspects, we are effectively in a startup now, which is, again, really funny, because it's never been a dream of mine to become an entrepreneur. Even, I would say, I would have a kind of a negative view, maybe a bit negative view on the startup world. So it's crazy to realize that, but now effectively I'm in a startup. So it's quite funny. And again, it's unexpected, and it kind of doesn't make sense. But at the end of the day, as long as I feel, you know, my integrity, personal convictions are maintained, why not? And okay, now I realize that this transition is a bit harder than I thought with Marco Polo, but okay, do I have time? A little bit of time. So the idea is, it's never been that easy to change life. Our environment shapes us in many ways. Of course, the physical, the environment, the cultural environment shapes us in many ways. And in many cases, this can be limiting for creativity, for for expressing ourselves and who we are. And especially during lockdown, a huge part of that environment is digital. And it's incredibly easy to change your life digitally. You remove a few apps, you install a few other, you unfollow some people, you follow some others, and that's it. You've changed life. You don't need anymore to go like Marco Polo, go through the Silk Road, which at the time is an insane idea. You have to leave your family, you have to radically change so many things. But then he came back from that journey with with the first Western writings on coal, porcelain, gunpowder. So all these incredible things that he found back then, to have these crazy stories, to have these crazy adventures, you had to, yeah, you had to give up on many things. Right now, you don't have to give up on so many things. You can entirely change your life by just switching tabs. So I guess my point is that because our environment shapes us in so many ways and can limit us so strongly, and because it is so easy to radically change this environment, it seems like there are a lot of incentives to try. And if that's just 1 week and see how it feels, for me, it has changed my life. So yeah, maybe it can change yours too. Thank you. And I guess now we have time for question, if there are any questions. I'll see if I can see the Discord or if Golan has questions.
Thank you so much, Cyril. This was an amazing presentation full of a lot of ideas. We're a tiny bit short on time, and there's a lot of questions that are in the Discord for you. Many people are asking, how do you get your ideas, and where do you keep a notebook, and how do you navigate social media and virality? Because it seems like you're not just good at coming up with ideas, but you're good at coming up with ideas that have viral potential. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask you to maybe talk to folks in the chat, because we have to get our next speaker on deck.
Yeah,
and in just a couple minutes, but this was a great presentation full of, I know I'm going to really think about this notion of a sprint really having to go within 1 week. I think that's super important, because the break of the weekend changes things. Thank you so much. And everyone, we're going to resume in just a couple minutes with Lee Wilkins. There's a lot of clapping on the Discord. Thank you so much, Cyril. And I'll see you in 2 or 3 minutes for Lee Wilkins.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Out. Welcome back, everyone, to our second talk of the morning of Art and Code Homemade. And it's my terrific pleasure to introduce Lee Wilkins, who is an artist, cyborg, and researcher, and community organizer interested in technological curiosities and the creation of whimsical robots. Lee is a doctoral student at the University of Toronto and teaches wearable technology, physical computing, and new media arts and design at OCAD University and Ryerson University. They're also a co-executive director at Little Dada, a group of creative technologists for social change, and community manager for Hackaday.io. Folks, Lee Wilkins.
Thank you so much, Golan. I'm so excited to be here. And this is particularly a really interesting format as well, because I feel like all of these talks feel really intimate because I'm just sitting in my home as opposed to sitting in this conference environment. So I feel like listening to everything before me, I've taken a lot of it very much to heart, more than I would have otherwise. So thank you so much for putting all this together, Bill and Golan and the whole team. So just quickly about myself, I feel like I generally wear a lot of hats. I'm not really sure exactly who I am or what I do, but I think I'm all of these different things. I tend to sort of bounce really back and forth between these different identities. At some point, I really heavily identified as an e-textile practitioner, but I think you'll see in my work it's pretty strayed quite a bit from that. I do a lot of community organization. I really love getting people excited about making weird technology. I also have a day job in experimental hosiery manufacturing, which is largely unrelated to anything I'm going to talk about here, but we all have day jobs. The stuff that I'm really interested in, is stuff like this. This is a project that I was working on throughout quarantine. So it sort of explores the environments around us. And it's also something I'm really thinking about a lot as we go into this next semester of teaching and teaching online, thinking about how people can explore the spaces around them and make technology into, out of something that we normally wouldn't have thought of as technology. I feel like it's an idea I've been peddling for a long time, but one of for me, the interesting things about being confined to my own space is I'm forced to reconsider it again and again in like all of these different kinds of ways. But really what my work is concerned about is the body and technology. And through watching a lot of different of the folks present this weekend, I feel like definitely on a lot of the same brainwave as a lot of folks here. They're often thought of as very different things. Technology is like thought of in these like sort of like rigid forms and devices, and the body is like this like organic other type deal. So I'm really about exploring like the tension between those things. This is a project I worked on for the last couple of years called Voids. And it's actually just a very simple sort of light trick. A lot of my projects you'll see like use like really simple technology, to try to maximize those kinds of results. And this project is kind of, to be really honest, I really like the idea of putting your head in stuff. I think that's a really fun thing to do. A lot of my work in the past few years has really been revolving around your head and your face and all of the things that you can do with it. So basically what happens here is when one set of lights is on, the person whose head is inside one of the trapezoids can see the other person, but the other person can only see a reflection of themselves. And then it sort of switches back and forth. So while you're watching someone else, they don't know they're being watched and they're watching themselves. And yeah, it's just a really simple kind of light trick. It uses like the same reflective coatings that are on buildings on windows. So there's no real magic here, but I was super fascinated by the material, and also the fact that it's kind of this everyday material that we really don't kind of think about. We sort of just take these buildings almost for granted. And I really like the way it kind of changes your perception of space and sort of throws it back and forth. So it's almost like a conversation between these two different people, in terms of perspective, and it's sort of being constantly thrown back and forth. So this type of work has sort of led me to this big question about, you know, what is a body, and where do the boundaries of your body end? And this is where, you know, I'm doing my PhD research, and I could spend a long time talking to you guys about materialist theory, but I'm not going to do that here. I just want to show you guys some cool some cool art. But basically, one thing I've been thinking about a lot is just like, what do we consider to be our body, and what have we kind of agreed upon? Are we thinking about the microbes that are all over us? Are we thinking about what happens if we get cut and bleed? Like, where do things start to and stop becoming your body? And one area I found that was really interesting, or like a way of thinking about this, is by using space settlements. So space settlements in the last few years have become sort of a central touch point to my research. And every time I do a research project, I imagine it in my imaginary space station, L4. During the 70s, some of you might be already aware of this, there was like a really big movement of sort of utopias and imagining all these different environments that we could live in. And the L5 Society was a group of folks who were super enthusiastic about the idea of a space settlement in a point called Lagrange 5. So what we can see here is sort of a map of the Earth and the sun. And these labeled points are called Lagrange points. And they are basically points of like gravitational equilibrium. So if you put an object in between, for example, where we have L1, which is right between the sun and the Earth, that object will stay like in gravitational equilibrium. And it's the same for all of those points. They each have sort of, you know, slightly different effects. But the L5 Society was imagining this space station at Lagrange 5. And there's a whole bunch of really interesting art sort of about what these space stations would look like and what kind of form they would take. So this is Don Davies, and it's a piece that illustrates one of these, the Stanford Torus space station or space settlement. And what I like to think of this is like status quo space. A lot of these space settlements sort of extrapolate on the way we have technology already and sort of like put it into space. And, you know, these very like normative ideas that we can like pretty clearly digest, like, okay, so it's kind of like Earth, but it's space. So I think this idea is super, super interesting. But the way I think of technology, you know, the way I'm trying to get people to think of that stuff differently is that things aren't always the way they are because that's the best way. But they're sort of embedded in these ideas of power and process. And that's why I like to think of like e-textiles and soft electronics and weird electronics as like a way of resistance. I mean resistance in partially a political sense, but also a way in resistance because often these materials are quite resistive. Yeah, so what I started doing is working with some friends to imagine L4. So L4 is kind of like the equal and opposite point of L5. So mathematically, they're the same. You could also put a space settlement in L4, but in our L4 society, we are, you know, like this like speculative, feminist space station, and we curated, myself and Hillary Predko and also Sagan Yi, we curated work from a bunch of different folks to imagine what life would be like on L4. So this is, yeah, like a zine that you can read online and have a look at what these different folks contributed. But also it's just sort of like I try to present all of my like current work as though they're operating in this station that is sort of opposite this normative idea of space stations. So it's like in an equal and opposite kind of floating point. And what would those technologies look like, and what would those technologies kind of feel like? I'm really interested in the idea of space stations because it inherently means blurring the boundaries between us and our technology. We're breathing in the synthesized air. We are like existing in this environment where everything has to be kind of curated. So it's really like so viscerally about bodies that yeah, I'm totally fascinated by these ideas. So in order to start bringing these two things closer, I've sort of divided up some work I've been doing into three sort of touchstones. The first one I'm going to talk about is bringing the human to technology. So taking, you know, like what we classify as like human feelings or human ideas, and like putting them onto this like cold idea of technology. So this is something that I think has been, it exists in a commercial sense. Of course, none of the things I'm going to show you have quite the market value that that we might want, but yeah, the first what I'm going to show you is this idea of what it would look like if a server room got married. So thinking of these two very like disjointed kind of ideas and sort of smashing them together. So this is a piece that I worked on with my collaborator Hillary Predko, and it's a drone dress. It sort of takes these ideas of like drones and servers and hard technology and sort of pairs it with high fashion. So this was a part of Make Fashion 2018. It's a runway piece, so existing in like a very high fashion environment. But basically, there's this drone that sort of follows the model down the runway, and her garment is made out of Ethernet cables, and there's industrial fans on her hips, and it creates this like really actually quite elegant output. And we sort of selected like the most broiest of technologies like drones and Ethernet cables and sort of smashed them together in this sort of like high fashion wedding dress. So yeah, that's sort of like part of this exploration that I'm going for. This is another project that I worked on actually just as the last thing I did before the pandemic hit. This is called Machine Yearning. So it's a pretty basic machine learning project, and it's just sort of about ways we can see the machine kind of reaching back to us. So basically, it is a whole bunch of personal ads, and we took them from like local Toronto ads because we made this in Toronto, and we sort of put them through a machine learning algorithm and tried to have it spit out what the machine really wants and try to like pull that sense of desire. I've highlighted some of my favorites here. I really, really like them because it kind of takes all of these different types of yearning and puts them together like the machine is really like fighting to try to find what it wants or try to find that like similarity. But yeah, it prints them out on little printer receipts, which, again, feels like this very like formal way of presenting this idea of yearning. So yeah, that's sort of like the ways I've been trying to make the technology more human. But then bringing like the technology over to the human side, I think is another interesting thing that I've been kind of exploring. Like, I was really thinking about what Hannah Perner-Wilson said yesterday about the idea of falling in and out of love with e-textiles. Definitely can identify with that. I feel like yeah, things have changed. So when I was thinking about my e-textile practice, I was thinking, well, what is it about the practice that I really find interesting? And I think what I really find interesting is the idea of finding affordances, using the body, and also like being like physically very like flexible and pliable and trying to make technology into these like organic kind of forms. So this is a couple of experiments I was working on, sort of using my face as the platform of the interface. So they're all super basic. They're all just switches that are made with conductive tape. And they sort of use the elements that already exist, of course, on my face or things that I'm already doing to create these small elements of interaction. So with this, I'm sort of trying to imagine what it would look like as like a full body interface that you don't really have to think about your interaction with technology. You don't really have to think about like engaging with it. It sort of comes about as a result of your your existence within the world, right? So what does this look like when the technology starts to become part of us? We don't have to think about like pressing this button. We can just sort of interact with our bodies in this way. So of course, all of these are just, some tape, some alligator clips, and some LEDs. But what I really want to do with this is prompt like ways we can think about engaging with the body and using it to like control other things or engage with things in another way. And then the third kind of deal is creating this like blurring the boundary a little bit more deliberately. So how can we, once we're at that point, how can we start to almost forget when, forget that one is the other. And I've taken a couple of stabs at this over a lot of different types of projects, and I don't think I've quite seamlessly merged the human and the machine yet, but we're working towards it. So this is a piece called Android Apparatus, and it's sort of about the symbiosis of performer and apparatus. So how these two objects can be fully intertwined together and create a reciprocal interaction. So this is a circus performer piece, and basically the wearer is on a lyra, so it's a suspended hoop, and she does a performance. The piece is designed, we put a bunch of sensors all over the artist, and we had her do this specific dance, and we used that data that we got to create this garment. So we looked at what areas of her body in this dance she uses to touch the hoop. We looked at how she's physically moving, how many times she's spun around, and we used that to physically design the garment. So the patterns on it are the data from the dance, and the location of everything is based on exactly how she's moving. And as she moves, it changes the lights on the garment. So we're trying to sort of create this thing where, in order for it to exist, and the garment to exist in its full beauty, it requires the use to be used in this very specific way. And in order for the performance to exist in its full beauty, it requires the use of the garment. So it's creating this almost symbiosis. This is another piece I worked on at Dynacon last year, and it is about collaborative sensing. So it's a sensor that can hear bat noises. So normally we can't really hear them with our human ears. We aren't capable of perceiving that high frequency. So basically, one person has a sensor on their hand, and they are able to point it in various directions and try to find these noises of the bat. And the other person has a transducer on their head. So a transducer is a bone conducting sensor, so only they can hear the output. But these two people, individually, they can't hear the bat, but when they touch hands, they complete their circuit. So they have to sort of walk together through the jungle and find these bats and listen together, and creates a collaborative kind of experience. So in this sort of way, we're sort of blurring what it is to have this singular experience, and it becomes this group experience of walking together and being together. Yeah, so that's what I'm kind of trying to do here is figure out how we can expand the sense of one sort of engagement. So I thought I'd take a couple minutes to talk about my next steps. I have been really thinking about what else I could do to create this blurring of environments and blurring of interactions. And again, during quarantine, I've become very, very interested in this idea of fish tanks, mostly for a hobby. You can see my fish tank over here. And I've been really thinking about what that's almost like for the fish. They're almost created a space station for the fish to exist. I'm really into the idea of filterless tanks that are really self-sustaining. So I was just sort of thinking about how I could have the fish experience this idea of L4, or this idea of the space station. So what I'm going to do next is I'm in the process of building a shrimp space station. It's going to be a wearable garment that allows the shrimp to experience the outside, and are almost going to be it's going to be a wearable device that'll have to take the shrimp out so they can get their UV light and be happy in their environment. But also it provides this fully sustaining system for them to live. So yeah, that's what I'm really excited about next. I'm really excited to try to make some wearable shrimp space stations. So that's about it. That's kind of all I have to talk about. I'm happy to take questions. If you want to get a hold of me, you can find me at Leeborg. And yeah, thank you so much.
Lee, thank you so much for this incredible presentation. Lots of great comments in the chat. I personally love the idea of mounting things on one's head as a mode of artistic practice. Got a bunch of quick questions for you. What's a new sense you've been hankering for personally?
A new sense. I'm not I'm not really too sure. I have a couple of implants, so I have like a magnetic implant. However, I feel like it's not maybe necessarily everything it's kind of cracked up to be. So I've been really interested in kind of exploring other implantable senses or ways to like augment that and make it, yeah, like a little bit more of a way of perceiving the world as opposed to just a cool party trick where I can pick up small Canadian change.
Mm. Um, So this question is sort of more goes to the philosophy of what you're doing. I really appreciate how your work spans both sort of performative augmentations of the body that are almost like fashion or for other people to kind of display that there's a kind of a public face to it, as well as very private things like putting a magnet in your body and things that aren't obvious to others and which um, enhance your own sensorium. Do you feel like this is the question? Do you feel like you're prototyping for a future you want to see, or do you feel like these works are set in the present and are asking people to reflect on their current relationships with technology?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Definitely when I situate my work within L4, it's like very future focused. But I also, don't think you can like snap your fingers and make a different future, right? We have to critically think about why we think about technology the way we do, and we have to critically think about like why you think one thing is technology and another thing is not. Like especially like the earlier slides I was showing, like all the food switches and stuff I made, like I'm not necessarily saying that we should always use corn as an interface for things, but I am saying we should like think about why we don't. So I'm not sure if that answered that, but maybe.
That's you're sort of saying both, and it makes sense that we have to kind of prototype it to get there.
Yeah.
This is a question from Leia, which is uh, how do we think about wearable performance garments that move away from reactive or visualization roles and into something interactive with interactivity or with its own agency? In other words, how do we meld performance and unpredictability? Thinking about
Yeah.
performance garments, yeah.
Totally. I really, I've been thinking so much about like agency in like the philosophic sense. So, how we can allow objects to interact on their own without any of this like human type interference. Um, and I've been thinking a lot about like thermal reactive garments and those types of like atmospheric reactive garments to try to create that sense of agency that these things on us are enacting around us and not because of us. And I think that's a really interesting idea that is definitely been swirling around in my head.
And a final question, because we have a moment, which is you also make zines, and I'm curious if you could talk about how or whether or to what extent that plays into your creative practice. Is it a mode of publication, or do you actually see like a much more tight material connection in terms of giving things to people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a couple of zines. I could drop it in the chat of like about wires, LEDs, and buttons. And these are three things that I feel like are often really overlooked in the electronics world of like, oh, and then just like, just connect it with a wire. And there's so much like small knowledge there and like very tiny facts that it's really hard to get a handle on. So I really wanted, a way for people to be able to get that information without feeling like overwhelmed or like it's super technical. So I feel like zines are super like they're an approachable way. You kind of like pick one up when you're waiting for an appointment or waiting for at a makerspace or whatever. So it gives people like this kind of casual way to absorb that detailed information. Like I just keep thinking back to like when I was learning electronics and I first stripped a wire that was multi-strand. And I was so confused because I thought that all wires were solid core and nobody had ever told me. And it's just like little moments like that I want people to have like an accessible way to understand. So that's sort of my motivation behind the zines.
We've got a question from Kate Hartman, and we have maybe basically 1 minute left. We'll see if we can throw this one at you. How do your art practice, community organizing, teaching, and doctoral research interact and intersect with each other, or do you see them separately?
Yeah, I feel like it's always they're always swirling together and always influencing each other. So, for example, like somehow L4 has now made it into my dissertation, but also I've I've run community events with it, so it's impossible to keep them one out of the other. I feel like they are, yeah, they're always self-influencing, and sometimes that can be helpful, but sometimes um, sometimes it builds on itself a lot.
Lee, thank you so much for your presentation this morning. It's really great to have you here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of today's festival. We're going to pick it up in just a moment, folks, in about 5 minutes with Laura Devendorf. So we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Mhm. And we're back. Welcome everyone to the final presentation of our morning session here at Art and Code. We do have 2 more sessions this afternoon and evening of Saturday. And it's my terrific pleasure to now introduce Laura Devendorf, who is an artist, researcher, and professor in the Atlas Institute and the Department of Information Science at the University of Colorado Boulder, where she directs the Unstable Design Lab. Her work presents alternative understandings of technology that draw heavily from feminist technoscience, trading notions of efficiency for engagement, control for humility, and individualism for cooperation and care. Laura Devendorf.
Thank you, Golan. And thank you to everyone who's spoken so far, and for the amazing talks and inspiration, and for those who gave me this opportunity to share some things with you. So hello, I'm Laura. I have something planned for today. I've had the benefit of watching other people's talks, and I've been liking this idea of something that's a little closer to a show and tell. And so part of my research is really rooted in my own experience, and maybe a good way of explaining it. Oh, hey, Frankie, you wanna come sit with me? There's a lot of things like tiny people, like this one. So yeah, I wanted to share this as very much coming from the home. There's a program called Artist Residencies and Motherhood that was started by an artist named Lenka Clayton, and I've always taken that as inspiration and really kind of trying to find ways to make my kind of home part of my research. It's okay, she's fine. Anyway, I'm starting in the kids' room, so maybe that's why we're also being interrupted. This is the room in our house that we call the art room. It's very messy, just like most of my house. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a few different objects, some that I find inspirational and some that I've made. And the theme for this talk is really about delight. And so it's about kind of finding delight in objects and the way that objects form us, both physically, the way they support us physically, the way our bodies support human and non-human bodies, and also what that kind of experience of delight or joy is. And as I'm going to show you things, I want to sort of emphasize that it's not just like a no-cost thrill. It comes from struggle and endurance and staying with something and labor. And so the different things I try to build, try to mix those two up. So the first thing I want to show you is a toy I used to play with as a child. And this is called the Frank-Ratchye. It's an Italian company, I believe. They still make these. And it's called the Mosaic Machine. And what this object is doing is it has all these colored balls. Tip them noisily up to the top. And then you have to sort of, be a little less intense. There we go. You sort of select where those balls go by pushing these buttons. There they go. And if you don't want many of the colors, you go over here and you can scan through them. So I wanted to start with this simple idea, just because it's sort of showing this, like, the joy of organizing, the joy of knowing that every ball has a place, and how in so many aspects of our design and life, we're seeking that kind of certainty. Or that's what I feel anyway. I mean, that's a lot of the reason I love code, is because it kind of offers me that sense of control and that sense of certainty. The second aspect of this that I'm going to kind of come back to is how it's not this kind of grand creative gesture like the blank canvas and the paint. It's really the joy of pressing buttons and doing a kind of operation. And so I'm going to fast forward now about, let's see, I was about 8 when I was playing this. I was about 28 when I got my PhD. So I'm going to fast forward about 20 years to a project that I did when I was a PhD student at Berkeley. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. There is no sound. This is a project that I worked on called Being the Machine. And Being the Machine was this idea of being able to sort of create with 3D models but not having to have a 3D printer create those models for you. So I've always been interested in code and creative coding and computer science, and I really liked learning about computational geometry and making 3D models. But I hated the fact that I had to give my models to a 3D printer to make, and I wanted to make them by hand. And so I devised this little system, which is just a pan tilt bracket with a laser pointer on it, that basically draws G code. And you follow the G code by hand. So you can see here that I'm actually doing that with clay. And so over time, you can take this wherever you want. I've built with pancakes, with balloons, with different, who knows what, cheese whiz, glitter, lots of pipe cleaners. And what I liked about this project was thinking about creative action, not so much as, again, this grand blank slate thing, but just the kind of ritual performing of a gesture, of becoming the machine. And then when you sort of take on that role, it ends up heightening different sensory experiences you have. So the dissertation I wrote was very much about how you learn about the agency of materials when you're working with them by hand, and how the materials come to form the maker, and that the ideas actually really come from the materials rather than us having ideas and putting them in the materials. So I'm going to keep this playing for a little bit while I walk us downstairs, where we're going to continue the rest of the talk. Actually, maybe I'll stop sharing so you can see a little bit more of my studio / workspace, which, you know, is also my house. So we're leaving the children's art room. We're walking through the hallway. We're saying hello to my husband, August. Hello. I actually got the old 3D printing system out. So maybe while we're going down, we can look at the simple little pan tilt bracket. I believe all the instructions are still on Instructables. Costs about, I don't know, $20 to make this. Although when you work at Autodesk, you have this sort of insane privilege of really intense 3D printers. So there might need to be some kind of finagling to get it to work on different printers. But luckily they also just sell pan tilt brackets. Okay, so we are getting set up in my basement. Let's get this going. Plugging in. All right, so now I'm going to
We have a technical glitch and we appear to have lost Laura for a moment. So we're going to try and contact her. Oh, yeah, she's been bumped out of the Zoom here. Give us a moment, folks. I'm going to get her number and send her a text or something. Bill, can you throw up a "be right back"? Your bottom, no, it's okay. The bottom of your face is out of view. We had a little bit of a glitch as you change over your power supply. It looks like you got bumped off of Zoom, but you're back in now.
Oh shoot, sorry.
And so actually we've missed everything since you since you connected back up to the power supply. Can you hear me? Can you there?
All right, I think maybe it has to do with my camera. So I'm gonna switch cameras.
Okay.
All right, I'll just use this camera. I was trying to use a dot cam, but it's been causing me problems.
Okay. Could you please pick it up from the moment you replugged it in the power for your computer?
Yeah, I can do that.
Awesome. Everything's good. I'll see you soon.
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, everybody. Technology rearing its ugly head again. So we've headed downstairs and now we were in the place that's been my studio for the past year. And this has become my new sort of mechanical muse. It is a hand loom and it's called a baby wolf. It's a floor loom. And what I really love about this is that it's kind of taking so many of those ideas that were in that original toy and in Being the Machine, and it already exists in a machine, which is a loom. So a loom is actually just lots of threads that are threaded perpendicularly. And the way you thread them through the different frames determines the pattern. And so what you actually do is do something kind of like assembly programming, where you wire up your pattern into these different frames. And then you use these foot pedals down here. Let's see if I can get it closer to the foot pedals. Hello, feet pedals that are down here. And that actually lifts up the frames and allows you to throw the different patterns through. So weaving has been so interesting because it's like you get to program, and you do get to program in a lot of different ways, but then you get to have all the discretion of like which G code instruction you execute at any given time. And you get to play with all these different materials, which is really, really fun. So some of the materials that I've been using that are my favorites are materials like this, which is actually just paper. It's kind of like a waxed paper. It's really crunchy so that when you weave something with it, it's not just about having something wearable so much as a whole sensory. It makes sound, it has a feel against your body. And in weaving, there's all these kind of cool different structures. So I'll show you this one. You're not even just weaving flat sheets, right? It's not all about dishcloths. But what I'm finding really interesting is there's this, I don't know, before written history, people have been weaving, and there's thousands and thousands of years of knowledge in the different structures for weaving, many of which aren't just flat, they're multi-layered. So in this example, you can see here, I've woven 3 layers at once. And so I can actually pull them back layer by layer, and I can create these really integrated systems. And some of the systems I'm making as part of my research are essentially just multi-layered circuit boards. And so they're kind of like woven circuit boards. So in this example I just showed you, this is a 2D position sensor. So on the bottom layer, there's a really conductive copper yarn. Actually, it's the same yarn Hannah showed in her talk the other day. Then the middle layer is this kind of separating mesh. And then the top layer is just one continuous strand of resistive yarn. So in that sense, you kind of weave it all at once. And then afterwards, you do a little printing and, sorry, not printing, but a little sewing and mending. And it all comes together. And what's really kind of fun is that then I can also just weave in things like the voltage dividers and the power and ground rails and things like that. One of the things that I'm maybe most excited about weaving is that this entire circuit didn't use any adhesives. And so this is an entirely disassemblable structure. So some of the research I'm doing with my graduate student, Chanel Wu, is really thinking about how we can use design software to build in disassembly and the ability to mend from design time. So instead of being like, oh, wouldn't that be a nice thing to offer? Really building that in as a core functionality. All right. So now you have been exposed to my love of looms and my love of weaving. And I have lots of other things in here, but now I'm actually going to shift over and talk about the second facet of weaving that I've also really loved. So I sort of compiled a whole bunch of books. This one's not about weaving. Let me get to the ones that I want to show you. So weaving also combines my love for control and programming, because to make any woven structure, you use something that's called a draft. So this is a very famous, if you want to learn to weave, this is kind of like your Bible or whatever religious text is very meaningful to you or not. And Annie Albers has this really beautiful way of drawing the woven structures. And so she draws the drafts, which show basically which yarns go over and under others. But then she also shows you kind of from a cross-sectional view, what structure that makes in the fabric. And just this process of even drawing them is really therapeutic. And so that's actually what I've included in the zine. It's sort of a quick instruction of how to write drafts and how to draw them by hand. It also means that when you go to thrift stores, you can find any number of craft books. So like this one, some of my other favorites, when you are interested in fiber art, you get a lot of spiral bound books. And I just love this idea that there's been this thriving community of people. It's kind of like a zine community, but it's really focused on technique. And they're all over the place and they're very affordable. This one is about a technique called marbling. And what I love about it is there's an inscription on the front about that says, "The best part of learning to marble was finding a friend in you." And so, I don't know, there's a sweetness to finding these things that have been owned by other hands, and knowing that you're kind of carrying on those different techniques. The other thing I like about weaving is it becomes a natural exploration. So all these plants around us, I didn't realize that milkweed that grows in my neighborhood can actually be sourced for fiber, and I can spin it and I can weave with it. I can also go on a hike and look for different plant species that I can use for dyeing. And some of these dyes have really interesting properties. One, they're natural dyes, and so they're not these kind of chemical dyes that we use in most of our garments, and where a huge amount of the pollution comes from in textile manufacturing is the dye process. So that's kind of cool to find these alternatives. Turmeric so far is maybe the most interesting and yellow stainy dye that I really love. All right, so I'm going to show you now a second little screen share. And this is kind of the obligatory, I am a professor and I'm working on a project and I really, really, really want people to use it. And so I'm going to show you, let's see, wherever it is. I'm gonna close out of that video. Oh boy, the power of technology. Okay, well, I'll give you an intro to what it is as I'm looking it up. But basically what we've been doing is we've been building open source tools for weavers. And so we actually have a deployed software. It's open source, it's on GitHub, and it's also just free for anyone to use. And it's called AdaCAD. And so AdaCAD actually has some different features of notating drafts that allow you to do things like design on different layers. It might not be super exciting if you're not a weaver, but I would encourage people to maybe think of this as a different kind of creative coding community. So right now I'm sort of replicating basic things weavers do, but you can imagine the sort of generative patterns that would come out. People have done really beautiful pattern making with Glitch, using different kind of meshing algorithms to actually create woven structures that map to bodies and shapes. So just putting this out there is something that is kind of fun to contribute to. And on this about page, you can have a link to the different GitHub repositories and things. So part of the plan with AdaCAD is maybe another ulterior motive I have as a professor is to kind of show that craftspeople are engineers. And so I think a lot of the times in my field, we see people with technical skills, traditional technical skills like computer science or electrical engineering, being comfortable sort of taking on the role of craftsperson. But at the same time, we're not very generous with giving the term engineer or technical to people who are really from the world of craft. And I think that actually has a lot more to do with social categories and the way that we've assigned expertise to certain kinds of demonstratable skills and to certain forms of knowledge that are easily explicated, and not to people with that skill in their fingers or that tacit knowledge, or that maybe want to work in a way that's just more attentive to the materials, more open to the materials, sort of having a say in what's created and really learning from that deep kind of material process. So one of the things we've started at the university, I run a lab there called the Unstable Design Lab. And one of the things we've started is an experimental weaving residency. So I have a call every, let's see, we'll have another one, I think around summer. And we have someone come in who's a fiber artist, and we have them collaborate with an engineering team to solve a problem. And so in this residency, we just made this kind of catalog to show the different materials and structures we used. We actually collaborated between a Finnish weaver named Sandra, who's lovely, and some aerospace engineers to create these headbands that have dry electrode structures on them that can sense muscle activity in the forehead. So this is the idea that if your astronaut is freaking out, it might be useful to know that, and that we could do that through some kind of unobtrusive sensing. So that's been really fun. And for those of you interested, I might encourage you to check it out on our website, which is, I've written it down for you. Nope, I wrote it down on a different paper. It's unstable.design. Here it is. Whoop, whoop. Okay, so as I close, I want to show you maybe some of the things I do with weaving. And this kind of brings it full scale back around to some of the things I talked about with childhood and being a mother. So I was really inspired by this book called Spacesuit by Nicholas de Monchaux. And this book talks about the spacesuit as body architecture and as something that helps your body adapt to harsh environments or makes your body able to inhabit spaces that it maybe not be meant for. And in this act of inhabiting, I'm trying to find a good picture, you actually get to see some of the forces it's protecting you against. So I was just kind of interested in what would this look like if we didn't create these kind of inhabiting suits for astronauts, but for mothers, and really thinking just about my own experience as a mother. So the first one I created in this series is called the nipple poncho, or the exoskeleton for sucking. And this makes my body more pleasurable to my children, while also protecting me from being sucked on all the time, which is a very real threat as a mother. Threat, I don't know, what am I saying? The second is the exoskeleton for sedimentation. So this actually has these integrated force sensing structures. So it actually senses the force of your children on your body over time. And I liked thinking about that in terms of erosion or the way your body and other bodies form against each other. Another one in this collection is the exoskeleton for screaming. So in this exoskeleton, I go in and I record the sounds of motors. So I walk around and I have a little interface on here where I can record sound on this little teensy audio chip. So I record the sounds of motors in binaural, and then I have a breath sensor here. So when I inhale and I reach the top of my inhale, the motor sounds start playing and I scream with them. And if you've ever screamed with a motor, it is very satisfying and also frightening to the people who love you. And so the last thing is this garment I'm wearing now. So this is actually one whole fabric piece that I wove. It's about 3 meters long, and I drape it around and wrap it around me. It is one giant PCB, and each one of these sections is a force sensor. There we go. And a color change region. So the idea here is I'm going to wear this for at least a week, and I'm going to track where my body encounters force over that week. And then I'm going to take this garment off, ship it to Hong Kong. It's going to be in a gallery. And those kind of interactions are going to play back on the color change throughout the fabric. In the same way, they're also going to generate heat. And so there's kind of this interesting thing about my body heat being transported through space and time. And I'm trying to find, it's kind of an interesting wrapping structure, but here's kind of my main control electronics. And I wove this entirely on a PCB. I'm sorry, on a loom. So when Kelly Heaton last night was talking about big PCBs, I could sort of sympathize. And I might suggest weaving. So this only took me about 100 hours to weave, and now I get to wear it around. But with that, I am done showing you my show and tell. And yeah, just wanted to tell you a little bit about my practice in life. So thank you.
Laura, thank you so much for sharing your home and your creative practice with us. That was great. I have a question from the audience, which is, someone writes, "I'd love to hear about how you ended up working at this intersection. What was your path to this work? Your influences? What were you doing as a high school student, and how did you end up here at this combination of different types of technology and craft, and very old languages and very new ones?"
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I was really interested in patterns and math and design. I had a thriving catalog of leotards that I made. I was into gymnastics, and so as a little kid, I would just design like thousands of leotards. I went to college for mechanical engineering, and I dropped out in the first semester. I just was having some issues, I think, emotionally with leaving home, and I was so tired of the kind of curriculum where everything was right or wrong. And for the first time in my life, I had taken an art class. And I really fell in love with the idea that the world had meaning. And I learned about semiotics, and I just was totally enraptured with this whole idea of things being more gray. And so I basically finished an art degree, and I worked at a clothing company as a graphic designer. And they were like a small, sustainable and organic clothing company. And then one day they needed to start a web store, and I kind of liked, I had taught myself how to do Excel macros. So started building lots of macros, and then I started writing HTML, and then I started writing PHP. And then I started taking night classes at a community college in computer science. And then I went back and did a second bachelor's when I was about 27. And so I was the oldest female undergraduate computer science student. And I just realized I loved being in school. And so, I don't know, it's always crossed between the beauty in math and pattern, and the kind of beauty in humans and what we do and how we don't make sense. I'm always trying to balance those. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation today, and this, just seeing your practice and how it comes out of your home and connects with your family and connects with what you're even wearing.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to break now for what's lunchtime on the East Coast. And we will resume at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time with our afternoon sessions. Schedules online, folks, and look to see you then. So thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye. Bye.